This is one of my most requested videos on the channel. It's finally time to talk about mixing. We all know how frustrating it is when you struggle to mix your own songs. The song is good, but without a good mix, you're not gonna be able to show that real potential when you play it for people in the industry. And in my over 10 years of experience, I can tell you having a great sounding demo is one of the things that can really sell the song. So it's crucial that every producer knows how to bring their own tracks to that industry standard. I have this track that I made a few years back and never actually finished it. I produced it in like an afternoon or something. And if I were to send this around, this would definitely need some mixing. So I'm gonna be mixing this track live in front of you so you can see exactly my thought process, my decision making. And if you also have a track of your own to mix, you're more than welcome to follow along to apply these techniques in real time. So the first step of our mix might be obvious to some of you, but I've seen so many producers making this mistake when mixing their own songs. You wanna make sure not to mix your song in the same session where you also produce the track. You want to make a new session dedicated to mixing and mixing only, because you don't want to find yourself questioning your bass sound, maybe scrolling through some presets and like changing the parameters. No, at this stage that has to be done because committing to decisions is crucial to move on. So here I have the stems that I prepared from my production and I'm ready to import these into Ableton. And if you're using Ableton, guys, when importing stems, make sure to pay attention to this setting that you're gonna find here in settings and then record, warp and launch, auto warp long samples. This has to be turned off. Because if this is set to on, what's going to happen is that Ableton is going to try to guess the tempo of your stems. And sometimes it might get it wrong. So especially in this case, we're mixing a song, we know the tempo of the song because either you produced it or you received the stems from other producers that will tell you the tempo of the song. So just set it to off so Ableton doesn't mess it up. And once you have all the stems in the session, what you can do is go here, file, collect all and save. I like to have all of these on yes, click OK. And this way you'll make sure that you have all of these files in the session folder so that if you reopen the session maybe in a year, 2 years, you won't have to deal with missing files. And as you can see, I lowered the volume of all the tracks by 8 dBs just to make sure that we have a little bit more headroom here because these stems were coming in a little bit too hot. Now, as you can see, we have some headroom to work with. We're not anywhere close to clipping, which is something quite important because we still have to apply all the processing for mixing the song. And so it's for sure gonna get louder. So before we get loud, let's get a little bit quieter. And when mixing, it's crucial to be very organized. You'll see all the top mixing engineers are very organized in the way they structure their sessions. So I'm gonna organize my stems in groups. These are all drums, group these, and this group, we're gonna call it drum bus, a group for bass. And I'm gonna color code the session the way I like. So I want drums to be orange, for example. And also the order matters a lot to me to always know where to find my instruments. We're finally ready to start our mix. And so it's time to ask myself, what are my priorities? And that is not a universal answer. It really depends on the song. Each song is different. Some songs, for example, are based around guitars and vocals. And in that case, probably that's gonna be our priority. But if you're mixing electronic music instead, your priorities are probably gonna be the bass, the drums. Start from the elements that really make your song. And to find out what those elements are, you probably have to listen through the song a few times, especially if you're mixing the song for someone else. In my case, I think I want to start from bass and drums, especially because we don't have vocals in this song, or like we have some vocal pads, these vocal pads that you hear now, but mixing vocals is a totally different topic that requires a dedicated video that is coming as well. And here it's the bass together with the drums that's really creating this super cool groove, you know, this nice pocket. And so that's where we're gonna start from. Let's go with the bass. All right, the bass at the moment sounds like this. Okay, so from the get-go, I love the sound of this bass. I recorded it myself using that precision bass back there. One thing that I always love to do when I'm using that bass is adding a little bit of CLA bass. How do I know that this plugin is gonna work? Well, it's just experience in this case because I've recorded that bass many times and tried several plugins. I really love the sound of that bass going straight into my interface and then just the CLA bass. It's not gonna change the sound drastically, but it's gonna make it feel a little bit fuller. So usually I start from a preset like this one. As you can see, there's already like a different tone, a little bit of growl. I also want to compress it just a little bit with this push, which is like the gentler algorithm in here. This honk, I really love this EQ right here. And you always want to listen to what you just did together with the mix. I'm gonna compensate a little bit for the output, maybe minus 3 dBs for now. This is before. The sound has not like drastically changed, but it made it a little bit fuller with a little bit of grit. And now I want to add a little bit more compression this time, because as you can see, there are some like quieter notes, some louder notes. So we want to try to even them out a little bit more. We don't want to like squash the bass completely, but you know, a little bit of reduction. And like I said, I don't want to transform the sound of this bass too much, but I definitely want to add some harmonics using saturation. And so Decapitator is probably my favorite plugin to do this. And sometimes I really like to push whatever effect I'm applying to really hear what is happening, what kind of saturation am I applying, and then maybe reduce it little by little, or maybe keep it quite strong and then reducing the mix, which is also like an option that I use quite a bit, especially for the way music is being consumed nowadays through phones, through devices that are not usually like loudspeakers. It's crucial to add a little bit of that saturation, because the harmonics introduced by saturation are those that are going to allow people to hear your bass even when listening on a small speaker that's not going to be able to play the super low frequencies like the 40, 50 hertz. So there's a little bit of like boxiness in this area. Not much, to be honest, but I want to reduce it a little bit, maybe with a dynamic EQ so it reacts accordingly, you know? And these are the frequencies that I really love instead. So, yeah. So without it, and with it. Oh yeah, like subtle changes, but this is helping so much. And again, I want to compensate a little bit for the volume difference. And I just want to use one of my favorite EQs of all time, the Pultec, to boost slightly the very low end. Like, let's try 60. I think this should do the job, because this bass, which is like an electric bass, is not like a synth bass, which is so rich in that range. And so I want to try to, yeah, okay. That's what I'm talking about. Drums and bass, like we said, are gonna be my top priorities for this mix. And now that we've found an identity to the bass, it's about making sure that they interact with each other in the right way. We don't want the bass in the way of the drums and vice versa. Actually, we want them to help each other, creating this very cool groove, this very cool pocket. So it's gonna be important here not to only work blindly on the drums, but constantly check in the relation between drums and bass, and always listen to the drums and the bass together in the mix. So now within the drums, I want to start from the most important elements. And for the kick, the first thing that I like to do is applying some processing like EQing, compression. And to do that, I love to use channel strips. In this case, I want to use this one from Brainworks, because I simply love the sound of the compression. As you can see, the compression is pretty hard at the moment, so I don't want it to be that hard. Maybe reduce the ratio a little bit, but we're probably losing a little bit of low end. And so I want to always compensate for that. I think around like 50, 60 hertz. Okay. Okay, and now of course, like, it's getting super loud. And now moving on to the claps and the snare. Since they're always playing together, I'm thinking of just making like a big group. And then within this group, I have a bunch of hand claps that I recorded myself. So these 4 tracks are supposed to be panned left and right to really give you the feeling that someone is clapping in a room and like everybody is spread out around you, you know? So let's do this real quick without going like too hard on the panning, something like that. You know, and on these, I just want to add a little bit of top end and maybe a small reverb just to add some tail. I love this. Cool. And now we have this clap and this snare. And so I'm quite happy with the way they sound. I just want to add a little bit of transient shaping. This is a technique that I always use. Sometimes even instead of increasing the volume, maybe adding a little bit of transient to a sound. This is going to make it pop a little bit more. We still hear the claps layered on top of the snare. The snare is another one of those instruments where you're gonna find probably some boxiness around this area, so slightly reduce it. But the thing that I'm missing the most on the snare and the claps is a little bit of grit. These drums have to sound a little bit dirtier, you know? I'm thinking of using this plugin, the Camel Crusher, which at this point is not even working anymore. Like the interface looks like this. I can still control the parameters from here, and I might want to reduce the mix a bit, but I love the way this is like squashing a little bit the snare and the claps together, adding some crunch, some sound. Wow, it's impressive. Amazing. And to keep this approach, one more thing that I want to do on this snare is adding a little bit of tape saturation. I want to really feel like the snare has been recorded through a tape. Like I've always using this back in the day, and then I haven't used it for years. But wow, this plugin is always amazing. You can crank the input. Oh my God, I love the sound of this thing. And just by increasing this, you make it like more dirty. It's just like bringing together also, I think, the snares and the claps a little bit more. Like it's squashing them together, but without losing the punch. And even when just playing the drums and the bass together, wow. And I just had an idea, since this song sounds kind of old school, to maybe add a little bit of reverb on the snare, some sort of like gated reverb. I don't want like the 80s gated reverb. Interesting. Like, of course, it's super loud. Oh, okay. Oh, I love the sound of this. Wow. Without it, okay, cool. But with it, oh my God, are you kidding me? It's helping bring the drums back a few decades. At this point, it almost sounds like we only have kick, snare, and claps. So it's important that we find a space for all of these percussions and hats that we have. Before I increase the volume, I want to see if adding a little bit of transient shaping can help just making these hats a little bit more noticeable to the ear. It's subtle, but it makes such a big difference to me, you know, that throughout the song, these hats are pretty much doing always the same thing. And that's exactly why when I have elements that repeat over and over like this one, I still try to create a little bit of movement and like give the listener the feeling like something is changing. And so an idea that I just had is, since we have this stem, which is called hats, what I'd like to do sometimes is just duplicate the track with the plugins on. So we have these two yellow tracks. At the moment, they're exactly the same. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute the chorus hats here, and instead I'm going to mute all the rest in the other one. So this way, when the chorus comes in, I can make sure that on this track, something slightly different is happening compared to whatever is happening before the chorus. One thing that I'm thinking, for example, is giving a little bit of a different stereo width to these hats. And one plugin that comes to mind right away is Microshift. Without it, like they're down the middle pretty much. And this way, like it's kind of opening up. This is like a small detail, but when the chorus comes in, this is gonna help making the song feel a little bit bigger, you know? And if we apply this same concept to other elements, when the chorus comes in without making like big changes, you're still gonna have the feeling that, you know, something bigger has happened. Of course, you could have done it in the same track and just automate the bypass of this plugin, but you know, it's just easier to visualize for me what's happening in the mix while I'm looking at the session. Now, what's missing in the drums? Tambourine, some additional loops, and then we have this layer, which is instead quite important because this is a real drum loop. And I think it's really important to make this live well together with the main, you know, kick, the main snare, the main claps. But if I remove it, especially the snare, like it's a pretty big deal. So I want to reduce these lower frequencies here because there's a kick in this loop. I don't want this kick to interfere too much with our main kick, and maybe enhance the snare instead. A little bit of compression, just a little bit. I like this. And now we get to these supporting loops. These are, I would say, pretty processed already from my production, but one of the most important thing for a layer like this is finding the perfect volume for it in the mix. And I have a very special tip for you guys. It's so simple, but it's so useful whenever you need to find the perfect volume of one of your elements within your mix. Turn the volume down as low as you can possibly go. And then from here, I'm gonna play my drums and I start to bring it in, okay? And I'm asking myself, am I hearing it? That's when I'm starting to notice it within the mix. And as you can see, I'm not even looking at the screen. I'm not looking at what I'm doing because I don't want to be influenced by the numbers. I don't want to just, think, oh, it should be something around minus 10 dB. I don't even want to see the values right now. I just want to listen and be like, okay, all right. Okay, I'm starting to hear especially those congas, and sometimes you might find yourself working with stems like this one right here, because these loops here in the verse and in the pre-chorus, they're always doing the same thing. But when we get to the chorus, there's actually in the same stem something underneath, like a little bit of a distorted drum kit. So when this happens, it's not a problem, but what I like to do is just, again, duplicate the stem the same way we did for this one. So now we can work separately on this thing right here. And one thing that I love to do, especially with elements that come in the chorus and we need to increase the energy, is give them a really different character. There's actually a plugin that came to mind, which is UAD Raw. And this has some very cool distortion. Okay, something like this compared to this. So you'll hear the energy really changing. Oh yeah, now the drums just feel fuller. You don't even know exactly what happened, but you have the feeling like the drums are bigger, there's more energy. I'm very, very happy about how these drums are sounding, and all of these separate drums that we worked on right now are going into the drum bus. And as you know, probably from all of my other videos, I really love to spend some time working on the drum bus to make sure that we can glue all of these layers a little bit better together, probably with some compression, maybe some saturation. But let's start with compression. I love to use this compressor on drums. This is just unbelievably good. The way I love to set this is with a pretty slow attack, either 10 or 30 usually, and the release pretty much at the minimum always. The ratio between 3 or 4, depending on how hard the compression feels to me. It's more like about taste here. So I'm just gonna play it and start to increase the threshold until I see a compression which is around 3 dBs or something. But again, I don't want to look only at the numbers. I also want to listen with my ears. So I might want to do this without it, kind of disconnected, and with it, it's all there. Love it. I love to use the Studer after this compressor right here. I haven't even touched this preset, and just listen to how it brought out the hats, for example, but without making them harsher. We can make it a little bit more obvious and get it closer to this, but of course we gotta compensate the output. Listen how it's saturating the top of the kick in such a pleasant way. Wow. So just these two plugins have made such a crazy difference. Listen. Oh my God, I love this. But again, you always want to check it also in the context with the rest of the mix to, make sure it doesn't feel like maybe it's too much. Sometimes working in solo can trick you. Now, the final thing that I always do on my drum bus is making sure that there are no weird resonances or frequencies that are bothering me. And maybe sometimes the low end can be muddy. The high end, it can be a little bit harsh. For example, I know that one of my tendencies sometimes is making the drums a little bit too muddy. So I'm gonna check that for sure. And to do that, I'm gonna use Smooth Operator Pro, which is a brand new plugin just released by Baby Audio. But I bet you're familiar with Smooth Operator. This is a newer version with enhanced features, and I've always loved this plugin. A lot of people talk about Smooth Operator Pro as the cheaper alternative to Soothe, which it is, but especially this newer version is so powerful and you can do many different things. So in this case, I want to start by reducing a little bit that harshness, especially here in the chorus where we have more layers, because yes, the Studer brought out the highs it did it in a kind of a gentle way, but still they're bothering me a little bit. So I want to start from this preset, which is meant to actually tame the harshness. You have this main knob, which basically increases the amount of processing, the amount of reduction in this case. So we want this to be pretty transparent. We don't want like anything crazy, but this is the cool thing about this plugin. It can be so transparent, but at the same time remove all the frequencies that are really bothering to the ear. You can always go here in output and click on remove to only hear what it's getting removed by the plugin. As I increase the processing, you can hear that it's not only removing the harshness, but something also in the snare, for example, which is something that I actually kind of like. So I want to compensate for that. I'm just going to create a new node, and I want this processing to be pretty fast. Like we said, I want this to be transparent. And so I'm going to set the release to be quite fast. The attack, I think I like it this way. Ratio, maybe 3 instead of 4, something like that. And as always, we can hear what's happening on these single notes by soloing them. So I want to solo this area here, the one where I think there's gonna be a little bit of this cardboard box effect. I think this could clean it up a little bit. And one more thing that I want to do is preserve the low end up until probably like 90 hertz, just to make sure that we're not affecting the kick, for example, which I don't think needs to be affected by this. Especially on those hats that it's making a subtle but important difference. So guys, make sure to check out Smooth Operator Pro. It's on sale now, and actually Baby Audio is having a spring sale right now. Until June 3rd, all of their plugins are gonna be on sale. Or if you prefer a monthly subscription, Baby Audio and Denise Audio are offering a subscription for all of their plugins for only $15 a month. And don't forget, whenever you get something on Baby Audio's website, you can use my code badhabit10 for a 10% off. A big thank you to Baby Audio. They've been supporting my channel since the very early days, and they keep making great plugins. So good job, guys. And to end this chain on the drum bus, I just wanted to add a very small reverb to the drums to make sure that they feel like they've been played live. I recently just discovered these reverbs from IK Multimedia. These are sounding absolutely insane. And as always, all the plugins that I'm using in this video are linked down in the description, so make sure to check it out. And sometimes for these kind of things, listening with headphones is a really great comparison that you can make, because sometimes the speakers might highlight some things, but I can hear the reverbs, especially the quiet reverbs, really well when I listen with the headphones. Okay, I think I like it. I can hear it, I want to hear it, but like, it's not crazy. And without it, now they feel a little bit dead. As you can see, guys, I'm trying to go as in-depth as possible for a YouTube video. And while I was shooting this video, I just realized that it was impossible to put all of my knowledge into a single YouTube video, which is gonna be like 30 minutes. So I had to cut down a lot of things that I would have done that I just couldn't do. But at the same time, I also wanted to show you everything that I know. And that's why I decided to make a full course about both mixing and mastering for all of you guys that really want to go as in-depth as possible and learn all of my tricks, all of my techniques to really mix and also master your own songs as a producer, which is one of the most important skills that you can have to really set you apart from all of the other producers that, yeah, maybe they can have good ideas, but they cannot make them sound good enough to be considered, you know? The bar is so high, and if you're not there, your songs are just gonna get skipped right away. So if you're interested, make sure to check that out. The link is in the description. I'm very happy with these drums and the bass, and now on to the rest of the mix with these other elements, keys, strings, guitars, and then we have these vocal pads. You will see that most of these layers, keys, strings, guitars, I've already done most of the work while I was producing the track. And this is something that I really encourage you guys to start doing as much as you can, because the closest you can get to the final result while you produce, the easier the mix will be. These keys, for example, are already distorted, saturated, so I don't need to do any of that. So just some simple cleanup here, especially in this area. Like, we have some boomy frequencies that I don't need. We're gonna find the perfect volume for all of these. But first, I want to make sure that this layer, I can hear it a little bit better. These bells should at least shine a little bit more, you know? So yeah, okay, definitely some top end, maybe a little bit of delay to have them bounce around a little bit more. Ping pong, yeah. And maybe I just want to enhance these frequencies that make the phaser a little bit more obvious, you know, the phaser that's already on these keys from the production. There's one layer that I think is super important among these keys, and this is the clavinet. I don't even think you guys have noticed it up until now, but this clavinet is basically replicating a little fill that the bass is playing. Okay, so this is definitely too quiet. But also, I think we should find its own, again, identity, its own character within the mix, because when it plays together with the bass, you can barely hear it, you know? And I want instead this to be a moment, something that when it comes in, people are like, oh my God, what happened? Like something that happens just a couple of times throughout the song. But then whenever it happens, you're like, oh yeah, why don't we try this plugin, for example? I kind of like this one. Oh, this will be amazing. Oh yeah, this is incredible. Wow, amazing. Such a tasteful layer that I wanted to be important in the song, and now it is. As you can see, sometimes I like to move horizontally, sometimes I also like to move vertically. And in this case, what made me think of moving vertically is that these keys are interacting with the strings, especially in the chorus, because these strings are kind of filtered down here, but when we get to the chorus, they open up and a lot is happening. You know, we got all of this and the keys are playing at the same time. So we got to make sure that we, you know, balance these keys and these strings a little bit better. The first thing that I want to do and that I always do on the strings, a little bit of OTT. Just a touch of OTT and you can hear that texture, the hair of the strings so much better. I'm going to reduce the high end a little bit. And I also wanted to have a little bit of compression on the strings bus because as you can see, this string run is just a separate layer from these. Okay, and so I want them to feel like a unique thing. So they're blending a little bit together. And at this point, the strings are becoming a little bit too important, especially they're getting in the way of the keys a little bit. And so again, I'm going to use Smooth Operator Pro. I'm going to use it in sidechain mode, which is something that I haven't showed you before. I can just tell Smooth Operator to take from the keys bus the signal. And so whenever we have those keys playing, maybe some attenuation. Again, like we did before, we can definitely preserve up to, I don't know, 500, maybe 1,000. Oh my God, listen to the difference. Without it, these strings are like in the way. But with this, just maybe a couple dBs of reduction here and there. So much better. Wow. I love the keys. I love the strings. I love how they interact with each other. And now for these guitars, I want to show you a couple of things because again, most of the work on these guitars, I've done it while I was producing. This super simple muted guitar, which is almost like a rhythmic element at this point. This is a super clean guitar. It's supposed to be clean. Maybe we can just pan it a little bit harder and louder. Okay, and we also have this guitar right here, which is again meant to be a clean guitar, not distorted at all. So I just wanted to add a little bit of exciter, this time from Ozone, with this retro algorithm to make sure that we keep that old school feeling. And just by doing that, we can definitely hear it now in the chorus, even though we have many elements. It has its own space. It's right there, a little bit panned to the right. And to finish with these guitars, we have probably the most interesting layer. This sort of like guitar throw with like a reverb and a delay, which I've already processed while I was producing, but I want to make it a little bit more special. Again, I want to give it a little bit of character. And so I have an idea here. I want to use a plugin that I've been using a lot lately, which is Soundtoys Devil Lock. It's one of those plugins that you gotta use carefully because it can be so intense. I want to add a little bit of crunch, but especially crush this sound so that the tail becomes a little bit longer. See, this adds crunch, but I want to crush it a little bit, of course, make it darker. Okay, that's very cool. Decrease the mix and listen together to find the sweet spot. Ooh, all right. So the very last element of our mix are these vocal pads, and real quick what I did is applying a little bit of EQing and a little bit of compression with our Vox. These vocal pads are made of me singing different notes, 2 tracks for each note that I'm singing. I panned one to the left and one to the right. I always try not to have exact values on the left, on the right, and also these first notes are panned like 16 and 20. These are like 14 and 17. So this way you make sure that the stereo width feels natural, you know, and wider actually. And just with this simple cleanup and a little bit of compression, they're already sounding a lot better, you know. But what I usually do when I have vocal pads like these is applying a little bit of processing on the whole group. I love this plugin, especially on these kind of vocals that have to be on the background, but I still want them to be kind of bright, you know, so we can keep them quiet, but they're also wide, spread out, and so we can still hear them. This preset, I just love it. It sounds so good. So without it, in a box, and with it, oh yeah. And since this is a vocal pad, I want to make sure that I add some reverb. I want to put it directly on the bus because again, it's a vocal pad. So even if it gets washed out a little bit, I'm fine with it. It's actually what I'm looking for. I don't want many lows here, like at all. So let's hear when they come in. Wow, so cool how pads and then that guitar throw, wow. So at this point, guys, we're pretty much done, but there are still a couple of things that are crucial to make sure that our mix is spot on. One thing that you should always do while you're mixing is every now and then check your mix in mono. Because sometimes by checking it in mono, you might realize that some instruments maybe are disappearing or are just losing too much presence. And you don't want that to happen anytime your song gets played on a device that's not stereo. Make sure that nothing is really changing drastically. Of course, the stereo is like much wider, but then I go back to mono and I still want to make sure that I'm not missing anything, you know? And talking about mono versus stereo, it's so important, guys, that the low end of your songs is always mono. One quick thing that you can do using just the utility is just dragging it on your master, and then you can set the frequency, in this case 100, I'm gonna do like 130. All of these frequencies, so below 130, are gonna be mono. The clubs most of the times are mono, you know, so if you make electronic music, for example, that's absolutely crucial. But in general, it's good to have the bass mono. And at this point of the mix, I always like to pull out my reference track if I have any. There are pros and cons of having a reference track when you're mixing. It's something that I'm not really a great fan of, or at least I'm not a fan of just like picking a track that you like and taking that as a reference and then blindly trying to match like the EQ, the levels of that song. I like maybe to like reference a track for some elements. For example, maybe I like the low end. Maybe I like how the bass sounds. I like how they mix the drums. I don't know, whatever that is. At this stage of the mix, sometimes I like to take my reference and be like, okay, is at least the feeling kind of the same, yes or no? And then I can maybe do some little adjustments before committing to, you know, my final balance that I'm gonna do right now. When I get to this point, I like sometimes to take a little break, like even just 5-10 minutes, and then come back with fresh ears, listen through and be like, okay, maybe now I have the kick, which is a little bit too loud. Maybe the bass is overwhelming. Okay, so I spent a few minutes balancing these elements after taking a little break. There were a couple of things that I definitely missed. The main one was that the drums were so loud, so I turned them down quite a bit. Same thing for these guitars, you know? Everything has its own space. And yeah, it's sounding great. Yeah. All right, guys, we got to the end. I'm super happy about the final result. As always, I hope you learned something new today. I'm pretty sure that all of these tricks and techniques that I showed you will really help you bringing your tracks to the next level. But again, for those of you who really want to go in depth about mixing and mastering, my new masterclass is out now. You'll find the link in the description. Now, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and guys, I'll see you in the next one.